In a Reddit mod's worst nightmare, a weekend with, actual women, exercise, and a group of friends, they head up to the nearby mountains to stay at a cabin, Evil Dead style, where they would be attacked by some of the unfriendly, leftover soldiers. See, back in the 1940s, a group of German soldiers, because if I actually say what they were, I would probably lose all monetization on this channel and never have any hope of regaining it back ever again, were driven into the mountains by angry locals due to their greed. But this greed appears to have sealed their fate. As the group struggles to outlast and outsurvive the onslaught of these zombies, it becomes clear that they may still actually be somewhat alive. So in today's episode, let's discuss the German popsicles in Dead Snow and attempt to understand what is going on with them biologically and if they're even actually zombies to begin with. But first, this episode is sponsored by your favorite game, Raid Shadow Legends. So finals are wrapped up, it's the summer, and you're on road trips. Or maybe you're just outside relaxing, and you're looking for a game to play with PC graphics on your phone. Well, Raid Shadow Legends is for you. With its awesome visuals, loads of powerful champions, challenging PvE bosses, and tactical PvP content, there's something for everyone. For me personally, I like running through the story to grind my arms and armor so that I can come back and decimate bosses that were giving me a tough time prior because I'm very petty like that. What can I say? It is satisfying. And if you download it now, the first episode of Raid, Call of the Arbiter, is out now. And to celebrate this limited series, Raid's going to be adding in some new characters that you see in the series as champions in-game, like the fearsome orc warlord Artak, and that's going to be available to everyone just by logging into Raid for 7 days between now and July 24th. And if you've seen the episode, or at least the first episode, then you know who Artak is, but I don't want to spoil the surprise here for everybody else. Just trust me and go watch the episode and all will be revealed. With all this awesome stuff coming to Raid, if you haven't started playing yet, now would be a very good time to start. Using the link in my description or scanning the QR code up on screen, you can get some clutch bonuses. And yes, I just said clutch because I'm ancient now. Things like the epic champion Talia from the Sacred Order faction and other useful things like energy refills, skill tomes, XP boosters, and once you're crushing your enemies in game, come find me under the name Roanoke. And if you're fast enough, you can even join my clan. Just hit the link in the description and I'll see you on the battlefield. So we're going to go ahead and get straight into it today because I love you. We open up the story with the horrifying realization that none of this is in English and I will be doing a lot of reading. But then we open up to a beautiful sounds of the Hall in the Mountain King as a woman can be seen running away from something. As she makes her way through the woods and snow, she stops to catch her breath, and you never do that. Always keep running. But then pops up that one zombie that shouldn't have been able to be there in COD Zombies, who broke the running pattern for some just unknown reason and ruined your 125th wave survival. Because of course he did. As she continues running, she trips down a mountain and mangles her leg before being cornered by the zombies and completely torn apart. So we need to make a designation here. First off, this is on par with Evil Dead. In fact, I'm like not 100% sure, but I am 99.999% repeating, of course, sure. It pays homage to Evil Dead because of how people get got, the campiness of getting got, and the gore, which unfortunately will have to be covered up. I know, it is what it is. But it's really cool that someone sat back and thought, you know what Evil Dead needs? More Germans, a true classic. So now we get some music as two cars run through the mountains, a car full of guys and a car full of women. As the guys talk about the women on the trip, the women talk about the guys on the trip. At one point, they discuss some actual good information. I told y'all in the cold ground video, actually, if you ever are in an avalanche, wiggle your head back and forth as well as the rest of your body, create a little room, and then spit. Whichever way the spit goes, go the opposite, as you need to go up, not down. Also, just hope you aren't completely turned up, like side down at like a 90-degree angle, because that would be a nightmare to get out of. So let's go through the group real quick so everyone can get familiar. We have Martin in the front passenger seat, Roy in the back passenger, Erlen in the back driver, and Vigard in the driver. They ask Martin if Hannah is still single or not because it appears as though he has the Hotspur, but he won't make a move because there's actually not really a whole reason. He might just be a bit of a nerd. Martin asks about Sarah as Vigard says she is hiking through the mountains and she should probably be there about the following day or maybe even there when we get there. Also, fair warning, I am violently American, USA baby, and because of that, I do not have the same dialect as people in this movie. Imagine that. So there's always some guy in the comments complaining about how I pronounce something, so you can go ahead and pronounce these nuts. So the women are having very similar conversations about the men in the next car. Hannah getting blinded in the passenger seat, like, gal, put your sun visor down, good lord, that cannot be comfortable. Chris is in the back seat, who is into some very odd timing for very fun activities you'll see later, and Liv driving the car. Getting to the parking area, Vigard unloads the snowmobile and tells everyone to follow his tracks. It should be about a 45-minute walk or so. There's no cell service out there except for emergency services such as 911. Which, quick question, does Europe use 911? Eurobros are gonna have to sound off on that one because I have no clue. So as they walk, Erlen talks about how many movies start off exactly like this as he gets nailed in the crotch with a snowball. And it actually did sound kind of painful. testicle, which, have you ever wondered why getting nailed in the crotch puts you down? The reasoning behind it is males, we typically compete for females. That's right, we're going completely off track. During fights, what's the absolute worst thing for your body and that can happen to you? A broken arm, a fractured skull, a flesh wound that becomes, infected perhaps. If you guessed any of those, no, you're completely wrong. It's your testicles being destroyed. It is an interesting line of thinking, actually. Our bodies know that we need to fight, and we're gonna have to fight in some pretty aggressive ways. And they also know all animals will fight in general in aggressive ways, but once the prodigy sac gets involved and that gets tapped, any damage occurs to it, your body pretty much freaks out, the fight's over, and you're gonna tap out. You can always find another female, but you cannot regrow your gear. After all, genetic material is stored in the balls. So if you've ever been curious as to why, apart from you, your body just kind of wants to end the fight, the biological processes are very much so intentional. Many nerves run through this area, which, get ready for these names, they are the iliohypogastric, the ilioinguinal, the genitofemoral, and the pudendal nerves. Yeah, bring those up in casual conversation one day. You'll look like a huge nerd. But as tissue damage is detected within the scrotal area, even if it's not detrimental, those nerves will immediately report to the spinal cord and you'll go into defense. This spinal reflex actually runs along the same lines as like when you touch something hot. Before you even register that there's pain there, you will react, because the longer your hand is like in fire, the more damage is going to incur. So it's your spinal cord that's like, hey, don't touch that. And actually it's pretty interesting because we are just now beginning to learn that the spinal cord is way more integral to virtually anything that we do, more so than we would give credit to it. Because the general line of thinking has been up until within the last decade or so that the brain is responsible for all of our movement and the spinal cord is just there to serve as a bridge. It's actually not true. In fact, they did a test where they took a spinal stimulator on somebody who completely snapped their spine. There was no communication between the brain and then the snapped off piece of the spinal cord, which I believe was in his lumbar area. They attached the spinal stimulator and they asked him to think about moving his leg or moving his foot. And he was able to do so even though no signal was going from the brain to the spinal cord. So we're starting to figure out that the spinal cord may actually kind of make us walk, and not just in a sense of it's passing a lot of information, but it has its own information that it then sends to motor neurons to contract in appropriate manner. So believe it or not, our whole body is integrated with itself. That's so crazy. Anyways, so before you register, you basically react. It's the same when getting hit in the crotch. Typically, that's why it folds you like an omelet, because it's trying to put a larger part of the body in the way to protect the sensitive areas. From here, the body will undergo what is known as pain. This pain travels up to the lower abdomen and then upper abdomen, and in some people it can actually travel up through the thoracic region, even giving them a headache. Isn't biology fun? From here, if permanent damage is not present, the body will kind of have the pain wear off after a few minutes, but its entire point is to end the fight you are currently in. And there's also potentially a psychological aspect to this as well. I know, come for the film breakdowns, stay for the conversation about why your testicles hurt when you get hit, and why it's funny when you watch other people. Which, by the way, why is watching another man get hit in the crotch funny? Like, you feel their pain, but it's pretty hilarious. This may be actually a two-pronged measure to diffuse the fight on the other side. The other man can feel the pain phantomly, somewhat, sort of like a social pain, that they just attacked you and they saw that and they're like, ooh. And then his mood may change because of what happened. He's more funny than anything, dissipating the aggression. It's honestly highly interesting to think about why this response even exists, but here we are to talk about German zombies, not testicle trauma, so we're gonna have to move on. Erlen shares a nice moment with Chris after this as they keep walking after a few seconds. See, it does wear off. So first off, cabin is in a beautiful area. If I wasn't afraid of flying, I'd be out there like yesterday. But as Vigard arrives, there is no sign of Sarah anywhere. Heading inside, literally an Evil Dead cabin, not complaining, it just is what it is. I really actually do enjoy the fact that they went for this type of route. Eventually the rest of the group arrives and goes tubing, on the snowmobile, raise hell, praise Dale sort of activities. Everyone flirts with their respective males and females, as one does on vacations when you're single, and then finish it out with a game of Twister because Hollywood told them it was fun. Some advice from Papa Roanoke: never trust Hollywood on anything. That's gonna always be my advice. As Martin and Hannah then sit on the couch together, we get what I can only imagine is German flirting. We'll call it that because he puts a pillow over her face, joking around about, oh, you want to see medieval anesthesia? And it goes over like a wet fart in church because she's claustrophobic, which nicely done, bro. 11 out of 10 play on that. Later, as Liv goes outside to drop the kids off at the pool, she hears something and can't seem to find anyone until she sees someone barely move in the woods. The group thinks it's either Sarah or a moose, since they're apparently both about the same size. As Roy goes out there, they get jump scared by my father-in-law. You see, meeting my wife, then girlfriend at the time, for Thanksgiving her father being German. Also, he could bench like, it was 500 pounds and squat like 100 pounds around the time. His shoulders are totally fused. But anyways, it doesn't matter. That's about how the interaction went. He likes me now because we drank enough beer together. But man, it makes me nostalgia back when I was 22. As he sits on the couch and tells Hannah her coffee sucks, he then rolls a cigarette and tells him something's in the woods, so here goes. The soldiers in this area were supposed to keep it occupied during World War II, as there was a secret facility near a fjord meant to kind of break up trade between Russia and England. Man, times really do be changing. However, during the end, when Germany started losing, the soldiers turned to looting the townspeople and jewelry. Eventually, the townspeople kind of got fed up and then chased them into the mountains with anything they had before they ended up losing track of them. Colonel Herzog and his men would never be found and presumed to have frozen in the snow. Now this evil is still up there waiting to be unleashed, and the college students should be careful as not to disturb the delicate balance. He then gets up and leaves to go camp in the middle of nowhere, joy abound. As Turgir, yeah, that's his name, gets up to leave, Roy then talks some more smack and then gets choked for it. Like, my boy, okay, just for everybody's information, I learned this in football. Take your hands, and if you pop somebody in the chest hard just below where the actual rib cage ends, it stuns people. It can knock the wind out of them, might even trigger a vagal response and gets their hands off of you. The vagal response, by the way, is when your vagus nerve becomes agitated in some way and can produce a series of cascading experiences, such as dizziness, nausea, ringing ears, and sweating. It can also make you pass out if you hit it hard enough. This nerve is actually pretty critical to the communication between your gut brain and your actual brain. If severed, which I've heard stories about this, in fact, actually went to EMT school, our teacher told us about the fact that his ex-wife got a surgery in that area and they cut that nerve, and after it was done, she was just never the same again. Very interesting. Now that you know that, it'll be with you forever. Protect your vagus nerve. So later that night, Viergaard wakes up and sees Sarah looking into the floor hole before following her outside. Upon doing so, he loses her before just panning slightly over to the right and sees her spitting up blood. He wakes up because that would be pretty alarming, but then decides, screw it, and goes back to sleep. Meanwhile, Creepy McCreepster from earlier is sleeping outside in a tent. As he hears something calling out to whatever's out there, nobody answers, which is pretty typical of what could expect. As he goes to check, which surprisingly he's got a force multiplier, with like, wow, surprised he doesn't just have you have a knife out there? I don't know. How is Norway with that, by the way? I have no clue. So he doesn't really see anything when he goes to look. Shining his flashlight around once, he spots a pair of legs out in the distance as another runs past and cuts his neck. And see, this is why you don't shine your flashlight at the ground and actually have it go out to the horizon. Also, I'm pretty sure my man here was camping at the base of an avalanche zone, so this was just an accident waiting to happen. Returning to the tent, the thing comes in and attacks him as the camera zooms out, and this zombie is just absolutely wrecking him in the tent. That doesn't sound right, phrasing. This does, however, note something rather interesting, which will be seen throughout and is a common theme. The zombie in this instance is using a tool in order to take the man out. From the ones that grabbed Sarah earlier, they were seen only in their bare hands. While this may have just been what the group had at the time, the use of the tools indicates a higher order of thinking, which would also mean the frontal lobe is still intact. Now, something else to remember is this is voodoo instead of infection, or at least it could be voodoo. We'll see here in a moment. But as such, it has supernatural origins, and it has supernatural origins regardless of what it actually is. However, we'll get to more context clues as to how the physiology of these zombies are pieced together, which I believe I will kind of support a different point as to what they could be, but the intelligence of the original man is still there. But essentially, it's all turned in a way. The next morning, Viergaard was freaked out by his dream, so he wants to go look for Sarah. He tells Martin and Hannah to head back to the cars if he isn't back there by morning, and then go get more help. Meanwhile, the rest of the group just kind of screws around and has a good time because it's Easter vacation. Stopping to eat, Viergaard then sees Creepy Guy's tent as well as a bunch of blood. Doesn't really think too much of it and is like, I should probably check on him. So he goes in there and then finds him looking a little less than chipper than we saw him earlier. This panics him as he GTFOs, but not before finding bloody footprints leaving the tent. Back at the cabin, Martin actually has an aversion to blood, which is a bit interesting for a medical student to be in medical school and have that. But just like the testicle hit, this is firmly rooted in our biology. So there you are, stalking a saber-toothed tiger with nothing but a spear and possibly even a stone axe. As you hit it, you manage to spear it through the chest, but not before you get a nasty gash across your thigh. The blood supply in this area is immense, so opening that up to some fresh air is not great. You were just frightened and had to struggle for survival against a larger creature, so your epinephrine and norepinephrine levels are high, your adrenal glands are just pumping that into your blood, giving you massive quantities of this material, which raises your blood pressure as well as your heartbeat. After looking down at your body, well, you have two options. You can either panic, further raising your blood pressure and heart rate, or you can do the other thing, just pass out. Passing out seems like a bad idea, right? But actually, it's not. In biology, typically traits will be passed down to those, and those are successful traits that kept a person alive to the point that they could, breed and actually have children. By going unconscious, your heart rate slows, your breathing slows, and with that, your blood pressure drops. When this happens, your body may have a chance to seal up the wound with clotting factors preventing you from bleeding out, as less forces are acting upon the wound and less blood is escaping. This is because the Homo sapiens race didn't always have the ability to just patch a wound like we have nowadays. The drawback to this mechanism is the brain can't differentiate between someone else's blood and their own. Because our brains are pattern seeking, if they see blood, they're like, oh, that's mine, and then you'll feel faint as the body tries to preserve itself. For me personally, I can see a lot of blood. I can see wounds, I can see surgical procedures. My brain does not react to any of it. This raises another interesting question. I know we're way off topic, but it almost seems like this is intentional. It is, because you need people to deal with seeing blood to help others who may be bleeding, and you need to preserve yourself should you be bleeding. And considering humans are social creatures, it almost seems like these are co-evolved traits with others in the group, which would kind of be a way for us to cover all of our bases concerning wound treatment. Although, does that make you more selfish if you pass out from seeing blood? I don't know. Maybe the real Chads are the ones who can see blood, because they're helping everybody. Get good. As Erlen goes to grab a beer, he spots a box underneath the floorboards. The group decides to open it up and finds a ton of gold. German gold from 1942. It has another name, but there's no way this video won't be obliterated off the platform if I call it by its actual name, so you will not see me saying what kind of gold it is. As they look through, Martin says they need to wait. Meanwhile, Vigard is following the tracks to find Sarah before falling through the ground, knocking himself unconscious like a total Chad. Back at the cabin, they open up the box because beer was involved, and they go to put it back as Hannah places a coin in Martin's pocket for literally unknown reasons. I don't know why she did this. Erlen at this point goes to drop the kids off at the pool and drops one of the coins on the ground. Chris then gets up and goes after Erlen, and this seems kind of weird. Joining him in the bathroom like a second after he got done taking the Browns to the Super Bowl, she licks his finger. Anyways, that's how you end up with a lab report on E. coli that it's no longer antibiotic treatable. Meanwhile, something picks up the coin on the outside while they're doing stuff, and Erlen heads back inside after the deed is done as Chris stays out there. While she does, something looks inside the outhouse before she gets pulled through the toilet and attacked. She crawls out but is injured in her abdomen. Slowly walking towards the cabin, screaming, Hannah thinks she hears something, but as she heads outside, she was too slow and she doesn't spot Chris before she gets tackled. She gets concerned because, Chris didn't answer, so Martin lock and loads Brides of Christ and then goes out there with the other men. Walking around the cabin, Liv stupidly jump scares him while he's holding a shotgun. Very smart. But then they find Sarah's bag in the snow. Bringing it inside, Erlen seems mega unfazed by Chris just going missing. He's like, oh, we didn't see her out there. Okay, so it's really cold. She was just going to the bathroom. If she's nowhere else, it might be a little concerning because I think there would probably be bears up there or something, right? Anyways, it doesn't really matter because as Hannah goes to the window, she spots Chris outside the window and then her head just kind of moves by, so she freaks out and goes and blocks the door. The zombies are officially attacking. Grabbing Liv, they're able to cut her hair as it becomes a literal game of COD zombies, bracing the doors and windows. Erlen says don't get bitten as they keep having to brace doors, and these things are ridiculously strong, which we'll actually get into their strength a little later on. Now the thing is, unlike most zombie diseases, there does not actually appear to be a literal form of disease associated with this outbreak. We know the Germans were forced into the mountains where they would seemingly freeze, but they would be cursed with something supernatural, which brings the question as to if they are actually zombies or are they something else. It's not even a random side tangent. This is just kind of the premise that I'm running with. So some people hate these and some people like these, but I think it makes them more fun having these in the summary as it gives more context that's going on. So there exists lore concerning the supernatural, the mountains, and the consuming of human flesh during frigid environments. This, of course, is the lore on the Wendigos. There are two typical ways in which a Wendigo will form. The first is resorting to cannibalism to survive in the harsh environment. Many stories of tribes in the United States would pass these cautionary tales along to make people understand the dangers of treading down each path. The interesting aspect of this thinking is that usually an isolated group group in the bitter cold in the snows of the North Woods would be somebody affected, which checks out with this Norwegian mountain range. The other possibility of a human becoming a Wendigo is associated with a person overcome by immense greed, which in turn leads to a anything goes as long as I survive mentality, which would fall in line with engaging in acts of cannibalism. To this end, it seems possible that these soldiers that went into the mountains would clearly have been alive and would have had to have eaten something in order to survive, which was likely one another under the direction of Colonel Herzog. So the question becomes, are these zombies or are these just literally a group of Wendigos? If you take the description of an actual Wendigo from Native American lore, the Wendigo is sort of an emaciated human figure with ashen skin, and this appears to have somewhat been bled over by European lore during interactions back in the day with their views on werewolves that combined the two to give the Wendigo a much more massive appearance, with them standing up to like 15 feet tall and growing larger the more it eats and covered in hair and deer antlers. But the original interpretation would have these Germans look like Wendigos with their ashen skin, taste for human flesh, and the preservation of intelligence. More in line with Wendigos, you need to understand that a central Wendigo within a group has been inhabited by an evil spirit, so to speak. Others around them can also start to feel the presence of an insatiable greed and hunger, as well as a need to engage in cannibalism just by being around that central person. Acts of violence typically will follow soon after as they fall under the influence of the Wendigo, which may help to explain why all of Herzog's men end up this way as well. Herzog may have been the first to self-preserve himself through cannibalism and became the vector for spreading cancer. Now, I will say this, what does help with this hypothesis based on what we see is the Wendigos are technically alive. Even though they have been possessed, the body can still be destroyed and destroying the Wendigo in the process. And like another part of this is they have to be inhabited by an evil spirit. And that's why in the second one, which we'll get to here in a moment, or the second movie, when he enters the church starts having all sorts of issues because there's an evil spirit in there. So with this in mind, this may help to explain the bodily processes that are very much so present in the soldiers, such as arterial bleeding, and is clearly showing that they had a heart that was still beating. During this scuffle, Erlen's brain gets some fresh air, good lord, leaving them down another group member. The next morning, Vigard wakes up, and that's literally brain damage levels of a knockout. There's this concept that getting knocked unconscious is like taking a nap. Absolutely not. The longer you are knocked out, the more of an indication of brain damage from the hit you just incurred. Also, fun fact, if your entire life is just an uninterrupted stream of consciousness, even when you're sleeping, when you're knocked unconscious, and that consciousness has been interrupted, what do you wake back up as? Exiting the ground, he finds a snowmobile, but the group is horrified back at the cabin. They discuss their options, none of them good. They arrive at the conclusion that 2 should attract the zombies, and 2 should run back to the car. Roy and Martin remain on that Sigma male grind set to attract the zombies as Hannah and Liv run back to the car. But nothing seems to attack when they go out there, and they still keep a lot of noise. So here's the thing. If they weren't there, couldn't you have just quietly snuck back to the car? I don't know, man. Seems like a bad idea to do it this way, but back at the caves, Vigard lights up the torch to make his way through. As he does, well, he finds Sarah in a less than ideal condition before getting attacked himself and just absolutely chatting out on these guys, enjoying some nice hand-to-hand combat and biting them back as well. During these ensuing fights, we do see several interesting things. First, bodily damage can actually end one of these soldiers. Because of this knowledge, that means the body is still alive. On top of this, as mentioned earlier, we see when an artery was breached, you can see that, well, I mean, maybe you can't see it, but I'll tell you about it. The blood spurts, indicating that a heartbeat is present. It's also bright red, indicating that it is oxygenated and moving that oxygen around the body, showing that a metabolism is present. By disrupting this metabolism, this means that the frozen soldier can be, in effect, eliminated from this mortal plane in the same way a normal human can. With that said, it's not as easy as one might think. While the metabolism can be interrupted, it takes more damage than normal as the body does not appear to go into shock like it would. This would possibly lend credence to the possession hypothesis, as the body's normal reactions to meat suit altering events is not present, as the possessing spirit does not really care about the damage to the actual body. But even with that said, it is still susceptible to damage, and if enough takes place to the functioning of the body so that it can be disrupted, that will cease movement until reanimated once more, which we will go over that process here in a moment. Over at Hannah and Liv, they're getting chased now too. Liv doesn't want to split up, but Hannah does, as they are lost, and the hilltop that they are on goes down like 2 ways, and one of them needs to make it back to the car. Vigard gets into another fight near the cliff's edge before taking out one of the soldiers, and he can actually hold his own because of his own military training. He's able to shake the one off on the cliff's edge after it bites him, but Hana and Liv aren't having really a great time getting chased by these things. Liv gets knocked out, but then wakes up being eaten, and then she grabs, let me say this right, Steelhandgranate. That's right, I played Call of Duty back in the day, and I probably still mispronounced it. So she blows up all three of them, taking them out, leaving just Hana to find the car. So we now meet the leader, because I've been talking about him the whole time, Colonel Herzog, as he sends his soldiers to grab Hana. That's right, this is not the US. Climbing up in a tree, she eludes them, but a bird freaks out because she's near the nest, which they hear and come back. Taking out one with a jump down, running away, she gets to a cliff as well, and then brings down the snowpack, keeping her and the zombie up, sending them both falling to their presumed fates. Back at the cabin, Roy and Martin are having a doozy of a time. Roy makes a Molotov cocktail and completely misses the window, setting the cabin on fire before Martin calls out for 911 to get some help, but they hang up on him because he sounds absolutely insane. They decide to head out to the shed where, evil dead, they find a chainsaw as well as a bunch of other tools. At this point, Vigard has gotten back on his snowmobile and patches up his neck bite. Whew, that would hurt. And then attaches a mounted LMG to the front of the snowmobile. Hana at this point then wakes up after falling in the snow and she can hear movement around her and she's stuck. Snotting, she sees that if she goes down, she'll be able to, die because she'll be stuck in the snow. But if she digs up behind her, basically, she can get out. So then as she emerges to the surface, she finds that the zombie is stuck next to her and does a Gears of War style curb stomp and takes him out. An absolute classic. Meanwhile, back at Der Eisendrach, that's a callback, Roy and Martin are posted up ready to take out some zombies. Working their way through wave 1 rather easily, Vigard shows up with the LMG and ends up taking out the next group, but gets stabbed and grabbed by quite a few as he's taken back to factory pre-assembly. Now, do you understand how much force that would actually take? We know when people have had limbs pulled off back in the day via horses, a horse would typically have about 15 horsepower. Pretty hilarious that we actually have a measurement named after them and it's not even right. Anyhow, 15 horsepower over the course of, say, a few centimeters, because that's what it would take to separate a limb from socket and pull it out, comes to around 20,000 newtons of force, with the ability to pull what is essentially 4,496 pounds over a few centimeters, which is incredibly strong. Now, because they were turning along and holding on, this is more of like a push-pull method to separate the limb. Sumo wrestlers, for instance, can push equivalent of 4,000 to 5,000 newtons, which comes out to 899 to 1,100 of force. This means that the infected are roughly 4 to 5 times stronger than a sumo wrestler, and with that stronger ability than like an untrained man, again, this helps solidify the position that they're probably a Wendigo given the increased strength. And to actually increase their own strength, because this will be kind of extrapolated on when we get to the second movie, is you would need increased bone mass, you would need increased connective tissue strength, and basically need contractility of your muscles to be way higher than what it is. Now, humans, you probably have heard this if you watch this channel, but humans really only have access to around 30 to 40% of their strength normally. Under bad situation, under weightlifting situations, you can access 50 to 60% of it, and under like really, really bad situations, the highest I think somebody has gone up to is like 70%. Trained athletes can get up to 70% normally, but this is like you're gonna need adrenaline pumping into your body, and even then, it can virtually destroy the connection. People tear pecs bench pressing all the time. In fact, there was one guy who had a boulder fall on him. I believe it was around 400 pounds when he was hiking, and it was basically skateboarding him down off of a cliff. He was able to bench press it off of him just being a normal person. Completely tore his pec away from his shoulder, but he was able to push the boulder off of him with no prior strength training. So the fact is that we have a lot of force in our bodies that we just don't activate. But if you were possessed by, say, an evil spirit, you might be able to activate it, but likely you would only be able to activate it once, and then your body would be ruined. So there must be also sort of a healing effect that comes with being a Wendigo. So Roy and Martin then mop up the rest, and as he does this, however, once again, someone has to do something stupid. Look, if someone is in a blood haze surviving, like fighting for their survival, the absolute worst idea you could do is just run up and grab them without making any noise. Call out to them. Stand a little ways back. Do anything but run up and put your hands on them Descent Cave style. But Hana does just this and then takes an axe to the neck as a result. While Martin laments over what he just did, Wave 3 starts as Herzog tells the infected to fetch him their souls. Martin picked up a shotgun early, so he takes out a few before getting bitten on the arm. At this point, he says a farewell to arms and then takes it off, much like Ashley. As he does this though, well, horrifically, he then gets bit in the crotch by another beneath the snow. And he won't be cutting that off, and considering the pain as mentioned earlier, I think I'd just take my chances with being infected by whatever these things are, rather than just remove a critical component of myself. As the Colonel stands there, they decide to just take him out and then go home, but he yells, "Arise," and hundreds of zombies get up from the snow. Zombie. Look, I'm gonna just be honest with you, the movie calls them zombies. I disagree with them being zombies, but I'm gonna call them what the movie calls them, so here we go. Looking at another, it becomes clear that they need to just run out of there because they don't want to mess with them. They manage to chase down Roy as he gets hit in the head by Herzog and then spears himself on a tree. Pain. So, that's the end of old Roy as Herzog then grabs the pocket watch from him. This gives Martin an idea. Running back to the cabin, he gets the box and gives it to Herzog, allowing him to escape. And I think this is the biggest indicator that even though, again, I'll call them zombies because what the movie has them set as, it's a Wendigo. Because the greed overriding all of their other thoughts just kind of lets Martin get away. As he runs out of there, he gets back to his car and he realizes he still has a coin in his pocket from Hannah slipping it in there earlier as Herzog shows back up seeing the car, which concludes Dead Snow. But wait, now it's time to pick right back up where we left off with Dead Snow 2, the Russians versus Germans Boogaloo. So we kick off our story with the attack continuing. As Martin gets grabbed by Herzog, the others join in attacking the car. He's able to get it started and takes off with Herzog hitting an oncoming truck, losing his arm in the process. As Martin gets away, however, he falls asleep like a huge dork, which leads him to crash. As the trucker goes to check on Herzog, he gets bitten and consumed by the other zombies. That's what you get for being a good Samaritan. The plan now is for Herzog and his men to take the town below to complete the original mission of taking Talvik. As we will come to know later, but I'll mention it right now, for being a good sport making it this far, Herzog continues to display the greed that drives him. At first it was gold, then it became a mission sent directly from the top during that time frame. Because of him seeking his own glory, this would be the secondary driving force for now, but a great example of what greed does. There is no end. It is all consuming, and just like with the Wendigo, it pushes them to consume more and more and more, never stopping until stopped by force. Waking up in the hospital, the doctor tells Martin that he crashed his car and the police are there. After him being the sole survivor, they're suspicious of him having taken out his friends because, well, they're pretty much brutalized and he was the only one to survive. But as the officer tells him that he's going to jail, the doctor tells him, well, we do have some good news. We were able to reattach your arm, but wait, his arm was left at the cabin. So they ended up accidentally attaching Herzog's arm to his body. This causes him to freak out and call it Satan's arm and attack everyone around him, except it's the arm attacking everyone, not him. So the nurse then knocks him out with a cocktail and he goes to sleep. Because the arm was able to be attached, this also clearly shows that the body is still alive and were altered. While having a piece of the evil spirit, it appears it is only able to inhabit corrupted, greedy flesh, but being a smaller percentage of Martin, he is able to control it. Once receiving Martin's blood supply in the same way the soldier's own blood supply would keep their metabolism running smoothly, this would in turn keep the limb alive, allowing for reattachment to success. Now, what I find intriguing is the power the limb contains, such as strength and other abilities, but still has to use a normal human platform as the basis, making it inherently weaker attached to Martin than to Herzog, who is fully corrupt. While that is happening, in a small farmhouse, the attack has officially been launched on an older couple as they are then torn apart by the zombies as a doctor zombie is able to reattach what I assume is one of the couple's arms to Herzog. The thing to know about these zombies, or Wendigos, is that if you do not fully destroy the body, it can heal itself. If a wound is fresh on a Wendigo and a new limb is brought close to it, the lore does state that limbs can be attached. This clearly shows that the mitotic abilities of the soldiers would far outclass in order to repair itself, which is great for Martin. Typically, as a reattached limb can take anywhere from 6 to 12 months to repair, but as soon as he wakes up, the limb is already fully fused with his body, and likely has taken on genetic traits as well, having the major histocompatibility complex, or MHC markers, to designate it as Martin cells, despite initially being Herzog, indicating genetic alterations associated with this zombieism is actually readily initiated. This same process likely happens with Herzog's arm as the genes are changed from the donor limb. This would be important because, again, the soldiers appear to be living, and as such, their immunological functioning would likely still be present, and the same can absolutely be said as well because he doesn't reject the limb. Later that night, as the zombies head to the graveyard, Herzog tries to wake them up, but they have all become bone because the ground isn't frozen, so there's no use. They will need to convert living. As the priest exits the church, he is accosted by Herzog as he runs inside the Lord's house, which is hallowed ground. No way voodoo would actually work. Well, he's able to still take the priest out and change him into one of his followers. Meanwhile, Martin is assumedly seeing all this. Now, this raises an interesting idea. Again, there's a lot of interesting ideas raised with this. So as we all know, Martin has Herzog's arm attached to him, which you might be inclined to think is actually going to infect him. However, it appears there are rules to this method. If a person is still functional, the brain or potentially the soul provides a boundary to the evil. Only by engaging in certain activities do you lose your soul while alive, such as consuming other people. So with that being the case, Herzog lost his soul, whereas Martin still has his, allowing him to resist the arm's influence from spreading before gaining control over it. When the priest was taken out, his soul needs to be released from his body in order for the evil spirit to inhabit the meat suit unhindered. This is how Herzog is able to convert those around him by removing the crucial component, which then leaves a shell. Later, as Martin wakes up, he is strapped to a bed, but a youngling American is there. He is reporting back to a zombie squad in America about the arm. Martin's interest is immediately piqued because he needs them to come take out the zombies. Then, this guy frees Martin as he promises him candy, but as the youngling asks him about the chocolate, the zombie arm grabs the kid and throws him through the window. And then, there's metal bars there, so it throws him through that. He jumps out to kind of help him, but then inadvertently Anakins him on the spot. The officer at this point sees him and jumps out as Martin then throws a Mercedes badge at him, and that kind of pierces his skull. Stealing a car, he then heads into town and gets a call from the zombie squad. Martin tells him about the zombies, to which the zombie squad leader tells him they will be there in a few days, but just try to keep them at bay for as long as possible. The rest of the squad does not seem jazzed to go all the way to Norway, and while they may look like a bunch of dorks, actually they're a pretty legit zombie squad, as we will come to find out. Also, Sigma Male Grindset, have 2 women join you in this endeavor? What a Chad. At the police station, one of the officers is on edge. Heading inside, he gets briefed on the happenings of Martin. Now he's broken free and taken out quite a few people already. While that happens, the zombie squad has already shown up in Norway and has locked onto Martin's position, somehow, I think by his phone. They go to the local gardening store and then get locked and loaded. Meanwhile, Martin has arrived at a museum of sorts as his arm tries to attack any passerby, and Martin finds a magazine basically blaming him for the end of his friends. Heading inside, it appears as though the colonel has followed him. Talking to a guy named Glenn, Martin is immediately recognized as Martin tells him to chill out, and they head upstairs as then he goes looking for something in particular, finding information on Herzog. Discovering his intentions, he realizes that he's going to attack Talvik. As he discusses this with Glenn, they look outside and realize Herzog has started their attack on the tourists who showed up, and it is just an absolute bloodbath out there. Moving to the tank, one of the zombies is able to drive it after successfully fueling it in the worst way possible, and Herzog now goes around and starts necromancing people to get them up. Glenn freaks out as Martin has an idea on how to hide. Posing as mannequins, they're able to hide from the newly infected zombies as Herzog grabs a map of where he was supposed to attack initially. Heading outside, well, this all looks horrible, and he left behind some of the infected to just kind of hang out there. Not really sure why. Martin is able to subdue them with the ridiculous Hercules arm that he has as it reacts to what he's thinking. Martin then realizes Herzog is building an army and he wonders if he can res people as well. Going over to the wheelchair infected, he gets him up without knowing that he actually did it. He then attacks it and takes it out, injuring it greatly in the process. Glenn says that he rezzed it, so then he does it again, getting the person back up for a second time, as then immediately that zombie squad shows up and then throws an axe at it, taking it out, which for a third time, they then get it back up. It's just, man, the hits keep coming. So in this instance, we see several alterations to the structure of Martin as well as his ability. Now the arm replacement would be about mid-tricep and bicep as well as the humerus bone that runs in the upper arm. For Martin to possess this strength and withstand the forces that are enacted on his arm, it's probable that it has been bolstering the shoulder joint. The reason is because, as we all know, for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. For Martin's shoulder to not snap in half like a chicken wing on Super Bowl night, the connective tissue would have to be more robust concerning its attachment points and not snap itself when completely lifting a person off the ground. It may be that the limb itself has somewhat of an area of effect concerning tissues that is directly connected. The other kind of cool thing about this that we will see with the infected, because they can be taken out after being necromanced originally and then just necromanced again, this shows that bodily mortality essentially disrupts the spirit's control of the body. Now, what are the rules surrounding how this is possible? Well, this is completely supernatural, so in the realm of science, it's not knowable for the time being. I say this because usually anything deemed magic in the past is now understood just physics. Anything deemed magic now may in the future be uncovered with more information and just kind of be like, oh yeah, of course, that's just how the universe operates. I mean, look at dark matter and dark energy. We still do not completely understand what that even is. The point is, if enough damage happens to the body, the hold is released until it is imparted again. This initial jolt of necromancy may in some ways force connections within the brain and body once more to make them living, essentially repairing it. So even though the external portion of the body is destroyed, it'd be like filling a pothole with sand in the road. The road can continue to degrade, but as long as the road is filled with the sand, it is still a road and it is still drivable, no matter how crappy it looks. As long as the internal structures are reformed and repaired, then external presentation becomes less and less of a concern, as long as the meat mech is still viable, which basically means as long as it's not completely destroyed, which again, you have to completely destroy the body of a Wendigo to take it out. But usually you have to destroy just the brain of a zombie to take it out. Martin then fills the zombie squad in on what the creatures want, which is simply just greed and revenge. At this point, the zombies just start wrecking the local population, starting with the younglings in the sandbox, and that's usually when you get up and run, when that much metal is coming towards you. Through their march, they convert more and more and then just destroy others. Getting affectionately known as Sidekick Zombie for the third time, they decide to keep it this time as Martin has control of it as they load up and try to get out of there. Luckily, Zombie Squad has an idea. A group of Soviets were taken out by Herzog's men after their capture and forced working conditions. The soil was frozen where they were, so they should still be viable and not bones, so Martin should be able to res them. And if he does this, they should fight for him as well. They take Sidekick Zombie and then leave Glenn, Monica, and Blake behind to keep track of Herzog to slow him down. Meanwhile, the police are not hot on their tail, but are coming across some of the same areas, such as the museum. They get a picture from the surveillance camera that sees Martin, but don't see the entire group that came afterward. Talk about cherry picking. As Monica, Blake, and Glenn keep track of Herzog, they get an idea that they either need to stop the Herzog's march or at least slow it down, or he'll reach Talvik too quickly. Martin, Daniel, and Sidekick Zombie continue their trek up to Red Point to get some assistance, as Martin says he feels bad because he woke up the original zombies and now he's supposed to wake up a group of Russians too. During Herzog's march, eventually Glenn runs out in front, which is a little odd to Herzog. He then yells about being part of the Ugly Face convention and throws a rock at them and then takes off running. Herzog then sends half his zombies to attack and then holds the other half back. As Glenn runs, well, they're obviously a little faster than him, but the girls then start throwing concussive force detonators around him, taking out the pursuing zombies. Herzog then notices this and gives the order for the tank to fire on the spot that the trio are at, taking out their means of escape, which was just a four-wheeler. At this point, it becomes a mad dash to escape as they are obscured by clouds of smoke, as Herzog assumes that he got them. The group then continues on. Martin at this point has had some nice PTSD flashbacks about what was happening during his time sleeping, as Daniel has gotten the car stuck. Daniel says that they need to find something to put under the car to give them some traction. Using Sidekick Zombie, well, that gives them the traction that they need, but then takes out the zombie again as Martin reses it for a fourth time. Again, internal structures get repaired, but external features remain shredded. Back at the police station, they discuss what's happening, but really don't make any money moves on finding Martin. Then they're just kind of talking about being heroes, but then as they sit there, they're like, screw it. Let's decide to get the shotguns and then start our manhunt. Up on the mountain, Martin asks an important question. How do they know when they res these Russians that they will actually fight for them? Daniel just assumes, well, I guess it's going to be like Sidekick Zombie, but I'm not 100% sure as to actually how this is going to go down. Time to take some calculated risks. They find the resting area of the Russians as Martin's arm knows what to do. Punching the ground like Herzog earlier, he sends out an AoE battle res, which gets the raid back up and moving, but then half of it leaves. As the largest approaches Martin, he calls him master, and he realizes that he does have these things in control. In the town of Talvik, it is completely abandoned as they were warned by someone that something was coming. I have no idea how, but I suppose when Martin showed up, it was probably pretty easy to persuade them to leave. The cops are also ready to rock and roll. As the German zombies show up, they find nothing but Martin, Daniel, and his sidekick zombies in the backyard. They antagonize the colonel as Martin shows Herzog his arm. Martin then brings out the Russians as we get some glorious zombie on zombie action. Zombie on Wendigo actions, or Wendigo on Wendigo actions. It depends on who you ask. As the battle commences, it's a knockdown, drag-out bar fight, basically. Man, I miss college. The largest Russian then heads over to Herzog, taking out his men. As this happens, the police arrive before their cars get run over by a tank. Man, I miss college. Meanwhile, Stavarin and Herzog engage in hand-to-hand combat. Martin then sends Daniel to the tank as the zombie doctor gets his men back up and running. Now this shows something that's kind of peculiar with this that we'll discuss in a moment. As far as we know, no other soldiers are able to get everyone, or anyone for that matter, up and running again. This would denote that the doctor is something a little bit different from the rest. Even while helping to fill the areas that are now vacant from the battle with the Russians, I believe the touch of the doctor is more integral to the actual process of, healing them rather than just cramming hay into an empty abdomen. This may just be providing structure support. As Herzog and Stavarin continue to fight, it appears that they're evenly matched. Actually, the Russians kind of beating the crap out of them. The police then make a hasty retreat while Daniel gets surrounded during his tank chase, but honestly, he does pretty well, and then is saved from the priest by Sidekick Zombie. As the cops watch, Martin is spotted, but they do not elect to go over there and help. The rest of the zombie squad then shows up at this point as they go on to attack a lot of zombies as well, while Herzog and Stavarin keep fighting. As Stav then goes to take off Herzog, unfortunately another soldier takes him out before he can land the finishing blow. Around this time, they begin to realize that they are actually losing the fight and need to take out Herzog to stop the others from attacking. So Martin goes hand to hand with Herzog to much less effectiveness as he has the arm, but the rest of the body is very much so a regular human form and not a reanimated zombie Wendigo. As that's happening, Daniel is able to get into the tank and starts taking out the tank crew as Monica, Blake, and Glenn get surrounded. Before Glenn can pass on some very important information and says he's just gonna say it, he gets stabbed through the neck, putting an end to that monologue as Daniel continues fighting in the tank. Getting stabbed in the abdomen is not looking good as Herzog goes in to strangle Martin. But as mentioned, the strength issues earlier, this is why full-body corrupted flesh appears to be stronger than just a normal human body with a corrupted arm. Martin gets completely saved though by the tank crashing through the building as Sidekick Zombie gets run over by the tank. Very chaotic. Martin and Herzog get into another fist fight on the tank as Daniel is able to overcome the crew inside and Martin is going ham on Herzog. Unfortunately, Daniel stops the tank at the wrong time, sending Martin flying, because of the law of conservation of momentum, and Martin asks why Herzog even came down from the mountain and then tells him about his greed. Herzog then jumps down to finish the job as Monica and Blake are about to get ganked. Inside, however, Daniel is able to move the tank barrel and fires a shot, taking Herzog's head with the round as the rest of the reanimated fall down before taking out the girls. They then hug it out as Daniel emerges from the tank with a seriously grievous wound. Martin asks about Glenn, but he didn't make it, and Daniel walks off with two women, again on that Sigma male grind set, as Martin decides to head in a different direction entirely, and now that he can resurrect, he has other plans. Also, he decides to just not resurrect Glenn for some reason and leaves. The cops attempt to look for Martin, but they realize it's too late, he's already gone. Heading down a small road toward a church in the middle of nowhere, he brings a shovel and has one of the worst plans I have ever seen. He goes to Hannah's grave and starts to dig her up. Upon finding her, he gets her back up and they reconcile their relationship in one of the worst ways imaginable in a car as Sidekick Zombie shows back up having survived being run over by a tank. The man here has seen better days. Well, that ended pretty horrifically. Or did it? As we see at the very end, past the credits, Zombie Doctor finds Herzog's head somehow, and it's still awake. So I'm guessing it's just an area of effect for his infected to stay up and moving, which is rather interesting. So what is the deal with this though? Well, it's clear to me that the Doctor and Herzog are actually equal to one another, likely both original Wendigo or zombies as they're called in the movie. The Doctor was a subordinate to Herzog, and as such, when they turned, he remained this. Because of this, when the Doctor was able to resurrect soldiers, this means it's almost like a comparison to a multi-level marketing pyramid scheme. They were on his downline, but he was still on a downline from Herzog and not a resurrection level. This means that even though Herzog was taken out, the Doctor remained upright and could in turn search for Herzog's head to reattach it. The others who were resurrected by Herzog, which appears to have just been like all of his men from the mountain, would then fall as there was nothing binding them to their meat suit shells any longer. All in all, while it says zombies, the method by which they reanimate, their hunger for human flesh, and the greed displayed, as well as their durability, would, in my mind, put them more in line with a Wendigo that has the ability to resurrect more so than an actual zombie. Because of this, the more supernatural elements would come into play, making these soldiers stronger than average, but still absolutely susceptible or offensive. It's unlikely this plan, apart from like an isolated village or two with very few officers, would even be successful in the first place on a larger scale unless the entire army could be assembled killing floor style right under everyone's noses, by converting the normal living into the possessed. But this also means Herzog or the Doctor would need to interact directly, as a bite does not spread this disease, and also your common handheld would seem like an excellent counter. It should also be noted, however, that the possessed do appear to be able to operate tools like any other human would be able to, and even drive tanks, meaning that if squashed early enough, it wouldn't be too much of a problem. However, if it was allowed to fester, it would require military intervention and a much more concerted effort to overcome. And this is running on the basis that if they figure out how to fly jets or figure out nuclear codes, it could become something much worse. But anyhow, I want to thank you guys for watching. As always, looking for feedback on the structuring. What did you think? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed, leaving a like would be great as it helps out with the algorithm. And if you were entertained by this, subscribing will help you be notified in the future. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, and Roanoke Tales channel link, where last week we talked about the Heinrich Heifetz killings with over 100 people accused, dozens arrested, but nobody was charged. Very odd set of circumstances. But anyhow, I'd like to thank my patrons real quick. First, huge thank you to our astrophysicist, Death's Dancer. Thanks, man. I'd also like to thank our scientists, Chad W., Lakune, Logan Satomi, Isa Nakanishi, and to the rest of my patrons, thank you guys as well. Your help goes a long way toward keeping everything running. All right, so that's going to do it for me. Hope everyone enjoyed, and we'll see y'all in the next one.